Managing emotions as part of conflict management is quite important, and to learn how to control and channel our feelings in a constructive way is really important for conflict management. So it's quite empowering actually when you learn how to manage your emotions. So there are a couple techniques to implement, sort of the strategies to manage emotions. Emotional self awareness really improves the ability to identify and name our emotions, and then even understand the cause of the emotion. And then we kind of need to learn how to differentiate between feelings and actions. So, what are the effects of emotions? So, when our emotions are so overwhelming, they literally take over and obviously can lead to screaming, crying, and physical and verbal violence. Some people have pain that is so great, they completely forget about the issue involved in the conflict. They're so involved in their emotions. And in a way, it's almost like they fear that it's going to be repeated again, so they do anything to sort of just try to make it go away. But it's really important that we also accept that our emotions are valid. So we cannot really stop feeling, can we? So, but we can learn to sort of look at the intensity of our feelings and then maybe express them appropriately. So the pain that we feel when we're really stressed, like headaches or stomach ache, um, it can be really intense for people. So it's no wonder that you want to avoid that in a way. But at the end of the day, it's like, when we do not address the conflict itself, we sort of stop listening and stop expressing our needs and concerns, and then really avoid a discussion because the issue is too uncomfortable. So the emotions, obviously, that are frequently experienced in conflict situations are anger, resentment, hurt, guilt, regret, and possibly fear. And when we experience anger, obviously we release adrenaline in our body. We could have like a very physical reaction. Blood rushes to our legs and head. So we start sweating, we're breathing, heavily, and often also the heartbeat becomes more rapid, and we sort of feel the urge to scream, kick, and run. So that's kind of like the fight and flight response. Anger generally can be healthy, but it's also destructive. So, when we're angry, sometimes it fuels our need for change. But when it's sort of inappropriately expressed, it can be very destructive. Hurt often underlies anger, so offloading anger onto others and making them the guilty party, or and hold the blame. But that is not really constructive, because it also keeps us stuck with the problem. Resentment is kind of like frozen or stuck anger. It's a feeling that blames others for the conflict situation and our emotions, really. So it's like we sort of feel like superior and self-righteous when we excuse me, hold resentment. So many people have great difficulty in expressing the pain and sorrow which underlies anger and resentment. So it may seem easier to feel resentment rather than to take responsibility for our feelings and for maybe changing the situation. Instead, we kind of need to look for what we can help to shift the resentment. So hurt is generally lurking underneath that resentment and anger. It communicates to us that our needs are not being met and that we're sort of wounded, like our self esteem is wounded. It's often easier for us to acknowledge our hurt than our anger. But acknowledging the hurt openly is actually empowering. So when we talk about our hurt, we may be better received by others. And then, that sort of encourages deeper relationships. So the alternatives to openly acknowledge the hurt is, usually what people do. They withdraw, they seek revenge, or, they feel resentment. Another normal emotion is guilt. And guilt comes up when we act or feel something different from what we expect of ourselves. So it highlights that there could have been a better response than the one we chose. So we feel guilty about it. Well, guilt can be self-destructive though when we allow it to gnaw away at us. So, there's always this underlying feeling of guilt. But it can also be productive when we allow ourselves to feel it fully and then move on by seeking to understand the source of our guilt. So when we're really empowered, when we choose what needs to be done to absolve it. So we can decide not to repeat what we have done, or we may, behave differently in the future. Another common difficult emotion is regret. Regret is the feeling that acknowledges that the unfulfilled potential of a situation. It generally entails pain and sorrow. So often when we show anger or resentment, we are actually hiding our regret. Fear, anxiety, and embarrassment block this expression of regret. Under the how dare you accusation is really the feeling which says, I'm really sorry it turned out this way. Regret is often the last emotion we release before letting go of our stored emotions and moving into more of an accepting phase. Another difficult emotion is fear. So when we experience fear, it's often when we feel out of control or when we need to, move with caution. So fear often arises from our own interpretation or prediction of a negative outcome or consequence. There are two acronyms for fear, actually. So the first one is fantasy experienced as reality. And you might have heard that one, false evidence appearing real. So often our fears are based on false assumptions. This is a really important point. Because we need to separate, our fantasy interpretation from reality, and that's often not very easy. But it's something that would be helpful. So really looking into, is this really true? Does it matter? How can I find out about this? Whether my fear is actually based on a real situation. So next time I'd like to talk about expressing emotions and what happens when we fail to express them appropriately, and dive into that a little bit. So hopefully you found this audio helpful. Thank you for listening.